The situation inside China's northernmost province is worsening. Video shows thousands waiting in line outside the capital's main hospital. Chinese state media reveals the regime's cover-up by counting confirmed cases as asymptomatic, which don't get added in the official figure. A grieving son is looking for help to sue the Chinese Communist Party, whom he says is responsible for his now broken family. 400 years ago, a German village was spared from the plague by making a vow to God. But this year, the residents were unable to keep their centuries-old promise. In the U.S., hope for normalcy emerges. In line with President Trump's plan, some states may be ready to reopen in May. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. We recently reported a worsening situation in Heilongjiang, China's northernmost province. Now there are concerns about its capital city, Harbin. An April 13th video shows people waiting outside the Harbin Medical University First Hospital. The person taking the video says there are 5,000 to 6,000 people there. On April 15th, the hospital announced new confirmed cases, but didn't give any details. But just before the announcement, the hospital twice told state-run media that no one at the hospital was infected, calling the claims rumors. Chinese state-run media reported on April 15th that people are no longer allowed to dance or sing as a group in public parks in Harbin. Cats and dogs are also now barred from the parks. We heard in a previous interview that to keep the number of confirmed cases low, authorities were reporting confirmed cases as asymptomatic cases. Asymptomatic cases are not included in China's official virus total. Now we have direct proof from China's Xinhua news agency. It reported on April 9th that 2 people already showing symptoms of fever, cough, and physical weakness were recorded as asymptomatic patients by Heilongjiang CDC. The report was from April 9th, but the patients had been showing symptoms since the end of March. An April 14th video shows a person lying on the street and shaking violently in a city of eastern China. Nobody dared to go near them. Other videos from earlier in the epidemic showed similar shaking. In Australia, Wagga Wagga City Council voted to cut ties with their Chinese sister city, Kunming, over the coronavirus crisis. They became sister cities over 3 decades ago. Chancellor Paul Funnell, who pushed for the separation, said the Chinese Communist regime had brought death and destruction across the world with COVID-19. He added he was not against the Chinese people, but the communist regime. An Australian senator is calling for the country to decouple trade relations with the communist regime. China is Australia's largest trading partner. The senator says Australia should consider bringing production home instead of depending on China. British newspaper Daily Telegraph has stopped publishing paid-for content from China. The content pushes upbeat views on China's handling of the virus pandemic, but recently the section has vanished. Over 100 experts signed an open letter calling the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up of the pandemic China's Chernobyl moment. Now to vaccine development. Since the outbreak of the epidemic, over 100 vaccines against the CCP virus have been put into development worldwide. Francis Pasteur Institute is working on a modified measles vaccine to trick the body into producing antibodies against the CCP virus. Telethon Kids Institute in Australia wants to find out if the tuberculosis vaccine can be helpful in combating the CCP virus. 2,000 healthcare workers will be involved. A heartbroken son in China wants to bring the ruling Communist Party to court. He tells us why. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
Li An wants support from the international society to bring the Chinese Communist Party to court. He says its cover-up of the CCP virus cost his mother's life. To protect his identity, we've given him a pseudonym and distorted his voice.
We trusted the media reports in Wuhan, saying there was no human-to-human transmission, and so we weren't on our guard.
Li didn't expect the virus to spread from Wuhan to Hangang, a city 47 miles away. Evidence of human-to-human transmission emerged as early as mid-December, but authorities didn't announce it until January 20th. Li's mom was sent to the hospital on February 5th. She died after 17 days. Family members weren't allowed to see her at all during this time.
When my older brother got back, he only got to see a coffin. There was no memorial service, no wake, nothing.
Lee's 93-year-old father had a mental breakdown after his wife passed away. He died within a month. Lee said his family has collapsed.
There's no darker world than this one. It's so cruel, so cruel. My tears are running dry. Sadness has overwhelmed me. Even sunlight seems pale to me.
Lee is upset that he was misled by the regime. If the government had admitted the transmission earlier, he says they could have taken precautionary measures and things would have been different.
We live under the sun just like people in other countries, but the different political systems we live under have made all the difference in our destinies.
He hopes the international society can step in and bring democracy to China.
It's best if we can vote for a party we support.
Lee doesn't understand why Western countries would nurture a snake like the CCP. He said it's like making deals with a gangster. Yi Ling and Juliet Song, NTD News.
In 1633, when the bubonic plague swept through Europe and took lives from 1 in 4 people in an alpine town in Bavaria, Germany, villagers in Oberammergau made a promise to God. They swore to perform a passion play depicting the last week of Jesus' life every 10 years if their lives could be spared.
And they did that. The first performance took place here in this church.
Pastor Thomas Groiner says nobody else died after that. Oberammergau kept their promise and staged the play every decade for the past 4 centuries. But not the 2020 edition. The show had to be delayed due to the spread of the CCP virus.
I told everyone involved. I've told the main actors. They all know. Excuse me. It's clear that emotions are running high.
This time, due to the plague coming from the east, Bavaria became the worst hit area of Germany, and Germany with one of the highest number of confirmed cases in the world. So what happened to Bavaria and why is the situation there so dire? We need to start from patient zero. On September 7, 2019, German Chancellor Angela Merkel was in Wuhan, China, cutting the ribbon for a new car part factory by German manufacturer Webasto. By her side is the mayor of Wuhan, Zhou Xiangwang, as well as a large business delegation from Germany looking for more trade opportunities. 3 months later, German state Bavaria detected its patient zero of the CCP virus, also known as the novel coronavirus. The virus came from the very same factory Merkel visited. The 33-year-old Webasto employee was infected by a Chinese colleague who traveled to Germany for company training. Today, over 30,000 residents of Bavaria have contracted the virus. Over 800 have died.
Ich sage für Bayern, es entwickelt sich nicht gut.
Bavaria is the largest German state and its second largest economy. Its gross regional product is similar to Switzerland's, and it's home to many top companies, including BMW, Audi, and Siemens. The booming economy caught the attention of the Chinese Communist Party. Over the past decades, using China's cheap labor and huge market, the Chinese regime successfully intertwined Bavaria's economy with its own. China was Bavaria's biggest trading partner in 2018 and 2019. According to the local Chinese embassy's website, over 2,000 companies in Bavaria trade with China. Over 600 have established offices there, with employees frequently traveling back and forth. China is also the biggest growth market for Bavaria's car makers. Volkswagen, for example, earns nearly half of its sales revenues in China. Its chief executive said that if the company were to pull out of China, half of their 20,000 development engineers in Germany would lose their job. And the car makers' ties with China run deeper than trade. According to a New York Times report, Volkswagen's luxury car unit Audi had a strategic cooperation with China's military-linked company Huawei. Washington considers Huawei a Trojan horse who spies for China and warned its allies not to use Huawei. But the tech company has been expanding its influence in Bavaria. Huawei is a generous sponsor of all mainstream parties, including Bavaria's governing conservatives. And their money might have been well spent. The current governor of Bavaria, Markus Söder, has fervently defended Huawei's right to bid for the Germany's 5G network. Söder is an influential politician and seen as a potential successor for Merkel when she steps down next year. An intertwined economy gives China more influence over German decisions. Last winter, when German officials considered a ban on Huawei, China threatened to retaliate on their car industry, forcing officials to choose between national security and their car makers. And it's not just the car makers who got tied up with China. To sell medical equipment and metro trains to China, engineering giant Siemens systematically bribed Chinese health officials. The company was later investigated and fined by the U.S. government. But Siemens got the contracts and enriched corrupt Chinese officials like Jiang Miankang, son of former communist leader Jiang Zemin. New York-based journal Beijing Spring reported that Jiang started helping Siemens get Chinese contracts 20 years ago when he worked for its China bureau. The cost of the corruption ultimately fell on Chinese patients and taxpayers. Bavaria is renowned for its higher education institutions, and the Chinese regime has been active there too. It's been seeking partnership with universities in Bavaria. One approach is through setting up Confucius Institutes. The state-funded language center is also used to push the Chinese Communist Party's narrative around the world. The institute in Munich, for example, frequently organizes trips to China for local German officials to promote the Belt and Road Initiative. Human rights debates are not allowed at the institutes. Lecturers are not allowed to talk positively about Falun Gong, a spiritual discipline persecuted in China, and they have to agree that Taiwan is part of China. There are 80 Confucius Institutes in Bavaria. Critics worry that German universities are at risk of becoming mouthpieces for the Chinese Communist Party by complying with its censorship. In an interview with German media DW, Michael Lackner, who is the head of the Sinology department at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg, said the Confucius Institutes are not necessarily the right place for debates on touchy subjects like Tibet. Over the past decades, politicians and businesses in Bavaria have built an increasingly close relationship with a regime that threatens the German state's economic independence, national security, and freedom of speech. A regime known for burning Bibles, jailing Christians, and tearing down churches, and with arguably the worst record for persecuting people of faith. When the virus came, Bavaria became the first state to announce a state of emergency. As the CCP virus plague continues, what will be the fate of Oberammergau, Bavaria, and Germany? Pastor Groner remains hopeful that 17th century vow may once again save them from the virus.
God helped the people back then. He saved them from the plague epidemic, spared them. That continues similarly to today. We are in this corona crisis, but a religious person who prays to God asks him for help. He has confidence in God that he will help. And I am absolutely certain that God is there for people and stands by them and saves them, just like back then.
In France, tensions rise between the government and the Chinese embassy. The embassy accusing French healthcare staff of letting people die en masse in the hospital. Our France correspondent, David Vives, has the story.
France's Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian on Tuesday summoned China's ambassador to France. This after the embassy published an article criticizing the way Western nations have handled the virus crisis.
Chinese embassy posted several tweets during the last weeks, saying that the French medias are fascists and spread a white people propaganda. But what seems to trigger the French authorities' reaction is a comment in a press release saying that healthcare people abandoned hospital to let everybody die in from hunger and from the infection.
The Chinese embassy also voiced its opposition to a petition initiated by French Senator André Gattolin, calling for the WHO to include Taiwan as a member.
We have at least 85 members of parliament supporting us in France and 5 in Taiwan, and 50 French senators.
Gattolin says the proposal is gaining support in other European countries, including the UK, Italy, and Germany. The Chinese embassy said the French member of parliament offended the WHO's director, claiming they called him a Negro, despite a lack of evidence to support the claim.
I must say I'm really shocked by the reaction of the Chinese embassy, accusing us of attacking the WHO director. Their reaction is a piece of propaganda. It's really a shame. I'm happy to have the support of the Minister for Foreign Affairs.
This move from the foreign ministers comes after several countries in Europe, including France, ordered masks and personal protective equipment from China. There's growing criticism in Europe against the Chinese regime over the poor quality of those products, plus the fact that the Chinese regime used the crisis for its own political interests. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
As states fight to control the virus pandemic, for some, things may be looking up. The CDC's director says some states may be ready to reopen in May.
Robert Redfield, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, says some states have only faced limited impact from the pandemic. According to him, 19 or 20 U.S. states could be ready to get back to normal by May 1st, President Trump's target date.
The plans to reopen the country are close to being finalized.
So far, about 94% of Americans have been affected by stay-at-home or shelter-in-place orders. The restrictions have battered the U.S. economy, but change might be on the horizon. With evidence that the outbreak is slowing in hard-hit states like New York, U.S. leaders are debating when the economy should be reopened without paving the way for a deadly second wave of infections. Despite the possible jumpstart, Redfield says mitigation steps, people staying physically separated, would likely have to continue until a vaccine and treatments are available.
Senators Rick Scott, Ron Johnson, and others have demanded answers from the WHO. They say they want to know more about how the agency helped the Chinese regime cover up information about the virus. A letter sent Tuesday asked the WHO Director General several questions like, when did the WHO first know about the SARS-like virus, who was in charge of coordinating the response with the CCP, and whether any WHO members received compensation outside of their work salaries. The senators have also asked for records of all documents related to the virus from October to March. We contacted the WHO to ask if the Director General would comply with their demands, but did not immediately receive a reply. The senators have given the WHO until April 27th to answer their questions. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
The Trump administration plans to buy milk and meat from U.S. farmers as part of an initial $15.5 billion effort to help them weather the impact of the coronavirus outbreak. Agricultural Secretary Sonny Perdue said on Wednesday.
Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue says the federal government will spend an initial $15.5 billion to buy food from struggling American farmers. The produce could then be given to food banks, which have seen a 40% jump in demand during the pandemic. Broken supply chains have hit farmers hard. Mass closures of restaurants and schools mean canceled contracts and wasted produce. There have been direct impacts too. Several meat packaging plants shut down as workers fall ill with the virus. Perdue's announcement comes after a network of food banks, including the American Farm Bureau and Feeding America, wrote to him asking for support.
New Yorkers are now required to wear face coverings in public, and a recent change in CDC guidelines causes New York City's official death count to nearly double. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more updates on the state.
Governor Andrew Cuomo is requiring everyone to wear face coverings in public, and New York City's mayor issued guidance to grocery stores. Customers must wear masks before entering.
And they must wear it in a situation where you cannot or are not maintaining social distancing.
Hospitalizations and the number of people on ventilators is still dropping, but about 2,000 people in New York are diagnosed with the CCP virus each day. And lives lost here have not slowed, with 752 dying yesterday. New York City's death count nearly doubled yesterday, but not because more people suddenly died. A change in the CDC guidelines caused the spike. Now, all local health departments nationwide must count CCP virus deaths in two categories: confirmed deaths and probable deaths. As the crisis continues to affect families, the city invests $50 million in an emergency food supply. But food czar Catherine Garcia says not to worry.
I want to make sure that New Yorkers are clear. Our supply chain is stable.
Plus, the city is hiring 11,000 drivers to deliver food to people who cannot leave home. Melina Weiskup, NTD News, New York.
And since New York now has more ventilators than it needs, some are being sent to neighboring states, 100 to Michigan and 50 to Maryland. Most years, April 15th is tax day, the official federal tax deadline, but this year is a little different. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin announced that the deadline to file and pay 2019 federal income taxes has been extended to July 15th to help people deal with disruptions from the pandemic. The Treasury Department earlier this week confirmed that more than 80 million people will begin receiving stimulus payments by today. The IRS this morning launched its Get My Payment Stimulus Check tracking tool. It lets people see when their money will be deposited or when a check will be mailed. The website will also confirm if you'll get your money in the mail or via direct deposit. Retail sales are down in the U.S. and factory output is also declining, but today Apple released a budget iPhone.
U.S. retail sales suffered an 8.7% drop in March, and output at factories declined by the most since 1946. This as extraordinary measures to control the spread of the CCP virus shut down the country. The clean energy sector lost more than 100,000 jobs last month. CCP virus control measures shut down manufacturing and halted home and business upgrades. They're a devastating blow to an industry whose jobs grew by 10% in the last 5 years, a faster pace than the broader U.S. workforce. Best Buy will furlough 51,000 workers on Sunday. The stores have remained open during the pandemic as they are considered an essential business. Abbott Laboratories said on Wednesday it would begin shipping a new blood test that can tell whether a person has ever been infected with the virus. It's considered a potential game changer and offers a chance to get the economy back on track by identifying people who may have immunity to the virus. Apple is releasing a smaller iPhone priced at $399. The company is cutting the starting price for its smartphone in a move to broaden its appeal during the economic shutdown. The iPhone SE will be available April 24th.
And in other news, retail giant JCPenney may be forced to file for bankruptcy. The century-old company has almost 100,000 employees across the U.S., but billions of dollars of debt and nationwide lockdowns have put the company on the brink.
U.S. retailer JCPenney is exploring filing for bankruptcy as the plunge in retail demand has forced the company to shut its 800-plus department stores. Sources exclusively speaking to Reuters on the condition of anonymity say it's completely upended JCPenney's plans to recover its business. It's one of many retailers that were already struggling with consumers shifting to online shopping. The 118-year-old company had recently made some strides in its turnaround attempt, improving sales at some stores by reducing inventory and refocusing on its core business selling mid-priced apparel to middle-class families. But the massive store shutdowns have thrown a wrench in those turnaround plans. On top of furloughing some of its roughly 85,000 workers and slashing spending, it is now considering skipping looming debt payments in addition to filing for bankruptcy. The company is contending with $300 million in annual interest expenses, and it owes $12 million on Wednesday, facing more than $2 billion in debt due by 2023.
And now to Germany, where it looks like the government won't be easing its protective measures anytime soon.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that social distancing rules would remain in place until at least May 3rd. She added that schools across the country could, at the earliest, start to gradually reopen after May 4th. On the other hand, schools and daycare centers reopened in Denmark on Wednesday. The country's prime minister explained the move, saying that it would allow parents to return to work and get the economy going again. But due to parents' anxiety, many still kept their children at home. A Brazilian city has begun conducting at-home tests in a bid to keep people with symptoms at home. Brazil's number of confirmed cases has risen to 28,000, but some institutes claim the country is likely to have over 10 times more. And in the Amazon jungle, leaders of indigenous tribes fear that members who left the area in search of food may have imported the virus into their communities. Their settlements are now under lockdown. To contain the spread within the community, they use banana leaves to cover their faces. On a positive note, a 106-year-old British woman was discharged from the hospital on Tuesday. She was born in 1913 and lived through 2 world wars. Now she has lived through yet another battle.
In Japan, short-term sanctuaries are popping up in unlikely places to provide a measure of comfort during the pandemic.
Passengers stuck inside at one Japanese airport now have a reason to smile, and homeless people in Yokohama have found a similar type of refuge. Travelers from places like the U.S. are required to be tested for the CCP virus before they can leave the Narita airport. Here in the baggage claim area, they can rest easy on these cardboard beds as they wait for their test results. In Yokohama, this martial arts stadium opened its doors when certain businesses were forced to close. The majority of people here are low-wage workers who normally spend their nights in internet cafes. The cafes shut their doors when restrictions began, but they usually provide a type of refuge to people who would otherwise be homeless.
People that were living at internet cafes shouldn't lose a place to go and be in a life-threatening situation. We opened this facility as a minimal safety net and our way to guarantee their lives.
Anyone can live in the shelter as long as they register and have their temperature checked. The shelter will stay open until May 6th, when the central government is set to lift the emergency declaration in Tokyo and 6 other prefectures.
Here at China in Focus, we bring you truthful, unbiased information. Don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest updates. See you tomorrow.